Thank you, everybody, for coming to the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube page. If you could do me a quick favor, see that little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen? Go ahead, click that subscribe button. Really does help our channel grow, our audience grow, and I really do appreciate it more than you know. So click that subscribe button. Appreciate your support. Now, here's the video that you came here for. The NBA Combine starts this weekend. I believe Mother's Day Sunday is when everybody shows up for measurements for the first wave of testing. And I'll say this, I don't think there's many other podcasts where the NBA Combine would be a major talking point, but I think on a show like this, it is very important. While the NBA Draft Combine doesn't get the coverage of the NFL Draft Combine, in some ways it's more important because NFL Draft, it's like everybody just shows up, you're in the same pool, you're fighting to get drafted, whatever. NBA Draft Combine is a interesting mixture of guys that are definitely going pro, the Cooper Flags, the Kaman Malawatches, whatever. But then also there is a full list of guys that is going to the NBA Draft Combine that is not sure yet. Am I staying? Am I going? Am I returning to college hoops? Am I coming back? Am I going to stay in the pros? Whatever. And so what I want to do today is actually talk about the biggest decisions that could impact college basketball next year at the NBA Draft Combine. Again, players that in theory could come back to college basketball, the 10 most important ones as far as I'm concerned. First one, I think it might surprise some people, but to me, I would say the most impactful player at the NBA Draft Combine this weekend is Carter Bryant, the forward from Arizona, okay? And if you've listened to this pod, I think the world of Carter Bryant. I thought Tommy Lloyd simply did not play him enough. I understand why he did it. He wanted to ease the freshman in. But you watch this kid on the court. He only averaged, quote-unquote, 6.5 points per game. But you could just see the talent was oozing out of this kid. I've said many times he reminds me of Rudy Gay when Rudy Gay was at UConn, 6'8", runs the floor, can defend, hits three-point shots. Only averaged 6.5 points per game, but he had 14 against Iowa State, 14 against Cincinnati. I mean, he proved that he can be the best player on the floor. And what's interesting about him, he's one of these guys, very toolsy kind of player that if he I said from the beginning, I said if he enters the NBA draft, I don't think he's going to come back to college basketball because he is going to blow people away in a combine type setting like what we're about to get next week. Now, the negative for Arizona, I think the more he's exposed, the more people realize how good he is. I think the counter to that, though, is that if he does come back, I think he makes a leap from very good player to college basketball superstar. I made the analogy with Rudy Gay. Never forget, Rudy Gay came back for a second year of college basketball. UConn was the number one team in the country all of that year. And Rudy Gay, by the way, played 20 years in the NBA. I think it was 18, but you get the point. So Carter Bryant, to me, is a huge X factor in all of this. I would add, I think if he comes back, Arizona with Koa Pete, with Braden Burries, with Jaden Bradley, the big guys, Awaka, I think they have an argument for number one in college basketball next year, but he's got to come back. Carter Bryant is number one on this list. Number two, a player we have talked about quite a bit, Yaxel Lendenberg. He is in my opinion, the number one player in the transfer portal. He enters the portal. He's recruited by BYU. He's recruited by Arkansas. He's recruited by Kansas. He's recruited by Kentucky. He commits to Michigan, but it's all contingent on what happens in the NBA draft. First of all, in terms of his talent, it is insane. 17 points, 11 rebounds, 4.5 assists, a block, a steal per game. And he is a guy, listen, if he stays in the NBA draft, he is going to get drafted. It's just a matter of how high can he get, and is that worth, staying in the draft, or does he want to come back to college for another year? Now, it's worth noting with Yaxel, he's a little bit older. He's about 23 years old, got to basketball really late, didn't really start playing until he was about 17, 18 years old. And so he's just scratching the surface of his potential. And so that could mean one of two very different things, depending on how you look at it. He could go to the end. He could say, look, I'm going to go to the NBA and get started on this process, and I have a chance to develop in an NBA setting. He could also say, if I go to Michigan and I ball out, I could go from the 28th pick in this year's draft to the 9th pick next year. So I'll be very curious. Obviously, financially, Michigan will very much make it worth his while to come back to college if he decides to do so. I think Michigan's a national title contender if he comes back. I think it's hard to see that if he doesn't. Yasa Lenenberg at number 2. Number 3, this is a big one. Carter Knox, Arkansas Razorbacks. Okay. So we're going to talk about Arkansas here in just a little bit. I saw a stat that kind of blew me away. But listen, Carter Knox was one of the best players on Arkansas, if not the best player at Arkansas by the end of the year. You go back to last season, he was a player that in their final games, he was, again, arguably their best player. 20 points, leading scorer in the Sweet 16 against Texas Tech. On top of that, he had another 16 points a few days later, or a few games earlier against St. John's, a game earlier against St. John's. So he was the best player for Arkansas late in the season, certainly after, Adu Theoro, Boogie Flan got hurt. And now you look at his process. If he comes back to college basketball, he is a guy like Carter Bryant, like a couple others, that I believe could make a giant leap forward. Like, I think he goes from, fringe first round, second round pick this year. If it all goes right, I think he could be the leading scorer at Arkansas. And I think we could be talking about him as a legitimate top 10 pick next year. So it'll be interesting to see what decision gets made. And the other thing for Arkansas, they're going to have a lot of talent. DJ Wagner, Trevin Brazil, Billy Richmond, Darius Acuff, etc. I don't know that you can necessarily replace Carter Knox, this late in the process. I know there's talk about Jameer Watkins, the guard from Florida State, who's also testing the NBA draft. Could he be a replacement for Carter Knox? I know for a fact Calipari is poking around on some reclassification candidates if, in fact, Carter Knox goes pro. But Carter Knox, to me, is kind of the X factor between Arkansas being kind of a solid top 15-ish type team and a team that is legit top 10, good enough to win the SEC. Next up, this is an interesting one, and it might be a little bit higher than maybe some people would think. I have PJ Haggerty at number 4 in this process, and the reason why is pretty straightforward. PJ Haggerty has not technically committed yet, but I think we all feel pretty good that if he returns to college, it's going to be to NC State. Now, I don't know that he's necessarily verbally committed to NC State. I actually am almost certain that he hasn't. But it feels like that is where he'll end up. And his decision to return, I think, in my opinion, would make NC State a very clear top 15 to 20 type team, very clear third team in the ACC behind only Louisville and Duke. And so I bring it up because if PJ Haggerty decides to stay in the NBA draft or not return to college basketball, I think barring something surprising, barring a last-minute guy that NC State adds that we're not expecting, I think NC State is probably a tournament team, but they're probably, in that very clear second, third tier of the ACC where they're, again, fighting to be a 9, 10, 11 seed in the NCAA tournament. Get PJ Haggerty, your top 10, top 25 team, maybe a top 20 team. Haggerty, of course, was the second leading scorer in all of college basketball this year at 21 points per game. We'll see what happens. I do think the good news is of all the guys on this list who are also in the transfer portal or have considered or are going to transfer, I'd probably put him at number 1 on the list of most likely to return. Let's get to number 5. This is a big one. Otega Oweh, Kentucky. So Otega Oweh, listen, if you listen to a show like this, you know who Otega Oweh is. You know the impact that he has at a place like Kentucky. But he is a guy, was the team's leading scorer last year, 16 points per game, 35% from behind the three-point arc. And I think to me, what was most important about Otega Oweh was the simple fact that when everybody else was hurt, when Lamont Butler was hurt, when Jackson Robinson was hurt, he was the guy that you could rely on. Now, the good news, if you're a Kentucky fan, is that, listen, he's incredibly talented, but there aren't a lot of people that are seemingly projecting him as a first-round pick. I think at this point, the assumption is if he's not a first-round pick, that's probably a great sign that he is coming back to college basketball a year from now. And so I just bring it up because Otega Oweh return to college basketball, I think, is good. And I think he would be maybe the SEC preseason player of the year if he does return. I think Mark Pope in one of his interviews actually said, I expect him to be the SEC preseason player of the year if he returns. Good news, by the way, if you're Kentucky, part of the reason I don't have him higher on this list, I think Pope's done a good job of finding guys where if for whatever reason Otega Oweh does not return, you still have a chance to be pretty good. Denzel Aberdeen's still going to be there. Jalen Lowe, who I know is testing, but Jalen Lowe, if he stays in the draft, it would be like an all-time shocker. But listen, Jalen Lowe, Brandon Garrison, guys like that, My perception, my hunch is that probably they would be okay without Otega Oweh. I still think he's coming back, but I would put him at number 5 on this list. Let's keep it going. Number 6 on this list. I didn't even do this on purpose. Otega Oweh's former teammate at Oklahoma, Milos Uzan, who played this past year at Houston. Listen, if you watched Houston, obviously national runner-up, LJ Cryer was really good. Juwan Roberts was really good. But I think by the end of the year, Milos Uzan was the most important player on that roster. And I don't even think that, what's his name? Kelvin Sampson has gone so far ahead to say that. Quote unquote, only averaged 11 points a game, but did average 4.5 assists per game. Played some of his best games in the NCAA tournament. 22 points, 3 rebounds, 6 assists against Purdue. Also had 4 points and 5 rebounds in the national championship game. That was obviously a low-scoring game. Only bring it up to say, listen, I like Houston going into next year, but really only 2 key kind of returnees, JoJo Tugler and Emmanuel Sharp. You don't get him back. Now you're probably going to have to start a freshman at the point guard position. In the Big 12, that is a death knell. That is the worst case scenario in a league with Texas Tech and Arizona and Iowa State and Kansas and BYU, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, he's the difference between Houston. Houston's always going to be good under Kelvin Sampson. But I think without him, you're all of a sudden relying a ton on freshmen. He comes back. You have your primary ball handler. I know they have Pop Isaacs, but Milos Uzan is a better player. So Pop Isaacs is there, but Milos Uzan to me is number 6. He is an X factor here. Number 7 on the list of the most important players at the NBA Draft Combine right now. Ooh, it's my guy. Tahad Pettiford, Auburn. So Auburn, last time we saw them, Final Four, poor Tahad Pettiford did not play well. He's a really good player, though. And listen, he was not the starting point guard at Auburn, but he was very clearly one of the 2 or 3 most important pieces on that team. Freshman guard, he's a little bit undersized, which makes me feel like it's pretty good that he's going to come back. But as a freshman, now he was playing with a very veteran team, but almost 12 points, 3 assists, and 37% shooting from 3. That's as a freshman. So imagine what he could do with a year of college basketball under his belt. Now, for him, it becomes interesting because the whole team is leaving. He's basically, if he comes back, he is the only person that's returning from last year's team. One thing I would say, the way Bruce Pearl is recruited this offseason, they don't really have another point guard that I'm aware of. Keyshawn Hall from UCF, Keyshawn Murphy from Mississippi State. Those are good players, but they're not a point guard. So Bruce Pearl is not recruiting as though he expects to lose Tahad Pettiford. Producer Matt is already, freaking out about the possibility of Tahad Pettiford not being there. I would think, again, 6'1" point guard. Doesn't really sound like an NBA player. I suspect he'll come back, but I have Tahad Pettiford at number 7, I think. Number 8. This is an interesting one. Cedric Coward was at Washington State, is committed to Duke. We've talked about him. 17.5 points per game this past season at Washington State. 7 boards. The thing is, he only played 6 games before busting up his shoulder, took a red shirt, enters the NBA draft, and a lot of people believe that he will get drafted if he stays in the NBA draft. What's interesting, though, is he also entered the portal. He committed to Duke. And, Duke, it's kind of simple supply and demand. You have him. You're a legitimate, top 10, top 11 team. I think I have them at number 11. You don't have him. You still have talent, but all of a sudden, you're really kind of thin in a lot of spots. I know Duke just took a 7-footer, but that's kind of a backup kind of pseudo practice player type guy. I don't think he's going to play major minutes. But Cedric Coward, you kind of need him to reach your full potential. Also worth noting, Isaiah Evans is at the NBA Draft Combine. I would assume he's another one. He's all tools, all talent right now without a lot of tangible results. Could he get drafted high? I think he could. But I think it makes a lot of sense for him to come back to college basketball next year. Coward, I'll say this. I don't think it's a lock by any stretch that he's definitely back in college basketball, so it's worth noting. Finally, number 9, number 10. I'll be quick on these 2 guys because I think these are 2 guys that, in my opinion, are both guys that I think are very invested in the NBA draft process. And at this point, I don't think it's likely that either comes back unless it's a disaster this weekend. Boogie Fland, Arkansas, Darian Williams, Texas Tech. So we talked about Boogie Fland plenty on Sunday's show because, of course, if you remember, Boogie Fland, the report was $7 million to return to college basketball. Now, we shot that down. I don't think it's anything close to that. Bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is if Florida can't afford to pay Denzel Aberdeen, who just helped him win a national championship, I don't think they're paying Boogie Fland $7 million to remove his name from the NBA draft. But I'll also say this. I think because Arkansas played well without him, there is a misperception about what he is capable of doing on the college basketball court. This is a guy that even after he came back in a limited role, still averaged 14 points and 5 assists per game. He was averaging like 16 a game prior to the injury. I think he's a very valuable player if he comes back to college basketball. I expect him as of right now to stay in the draft. And then Darian Williams, we've talked a lot about him. Really key player for Texas Tech, 15 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4 assists per game. By the way, at 6'7", shot 34% from three, played great in the NCAA tournament, 28 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists against Drake, 20 points against Arkansas, 23 in the loss to Florida. He's another one. I think he is invested in the NBA draft. I don't even think his recruiting process has really begun. But what I would say is if he returns, it feels like Kansas is probably number one. And I think NC State is sniffing around. I find it hard to believe NC State, even with Will Wade, would have the financials to get both him and PJ Haggerty. So he probably becomes a little bit more of a priority if Haggerty doesn't come back. And by the way, I know they're two completely different players. I'm just saying I think Will Wade and that staff have probably strategically saved a little bit of NIL money for one of these guys. And so I would say if Williams comes back, it's probably Kansas number one with NC State lurking in the weeds. NBA Draft Combine starts this weekend. And listen, I'm not going to lie and say like we're going to have wall-to-wall coverage of it, but there's going to be storylines out of it in terms of players that play their way into the NBA draft, play their way out of the NBA draft, and we're going to discuss them all in the coming days.